America is driving itself and you off a fiscal cliff with its deficit spending. Neither Congress nor the American people want to solve the problem in its current state. Here's why from my recent article published in American Thinker. Last week brought another balance the budget charade to the American people, ending with another fiscal snafu. Situation normal, all, yeah, you know. It's a form of glorious national codependency, where the American people blame Washington for the gratuitous spending, Washington blames each other, and nothing changes but the increase in the national debt. Consider last week's wailing and gnashing of teeth as nothing more than a national catharsis that purges our anxiety over impending fiscal doom. We feel better because we drained the angst from our system, but spending remains out of control as the nation drives itself over a fiscal cliff. Nothing changes because the American spending crisis can't be solved. Not in its present form, and not without changes the American people refuse to make. Here's why. First, this is about deficits and the national debt. People think the national debt results from discretionary overspending, $1,000 Army toilet seats, $1 million federal grants to study the sex lives of hermaphrodite salamanders. Washington pay raises and legislative pork barrel projects are solely responsible for trillion-dollar deficits each year. They contribute, but they are not the problem. They're actually pocket change that wouldn't cover 2023's $1.6 trillion deficit if they were eliminated. See, here's where the problem lies. In 2023, 86% of the $6.1 trillion in federal spending covered mandatory budgets that the government must pay according to either federal law or common sense. This spending is locked in. There's no room for cuts. Here's how it breaks down and why there's no solution. The following totals came from the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. To see them, click here in the article. So let's start with the lowest line items. Interest on the national debt, $659 billion. The nation defaults if the government refuses to pay, which is financial suicide. Income, security, and veterans benefits, $950 billion. This includes financial assistance to the disabled, their families, low-income households, and family members who survived someone who recently received Social Security benefits. Medicare and Medicaid, $1.46 trillion. These cover a portion or all of the health care for a vast number of people in the nation, from illegal aliens to the elderly. It provides cradle-to-grave services from children's health insurance programs, CHIP, to paying the cost of nursing home care for the elderly once they exhaust personal assets. Social Security payments, $1.3 trillion. This sacred payment has become the sacrosanct American golden calf of American politics. As a conservative, I'll add this one. Defense spending, $805 billion. Defense spending is discretionary and can be cut. But with the war in Ukraine, Middle East conflicts, and China's desire to take Taiwan, reductions place Americans at risk. So the total cost of these untouchable programs, from the interest on the debt and entitlements to defense spending, is $5.2 trillion, which leaves only $917 billion in discretionary spending for everything else the government does. So what's exactly the government going to cut? Nursing home care and aircraft carrier battle groups, or weapons development in the age of drone warfare and disability payments? The answer is nothing. Our politicians sold an endless stream of programs to an American public who embraced them with open arms, while neither side bothered to ask if the government could actually pay for them. The generations of largesse have created dependency, and they're considered a natural right to which anyone currently living on American soil is presently entitled. This created the greatest challenge of this entire budget drama: the mindset of Americans who believe the federal government can pay for all the entitlements the vast majority of Americans can't live without. Nearly everyone and their family receives some level of government subsidy, whether it's the Earned Income Tax Credit for some working households who pay no income taxes but receive a payment of thousands of dollars from the federal government if they meet income guidelines, to Medicaid that pays for nursing care for the elderly who have exhausted their resources so families do not have to care for them in their homes. Much of the nation receives something from these categories, and that's the problem. A $2,500 EITC payment doesn't seem like much compared to a $6.1 trillion budget, But a plethora of small amounts adds up in ways people can't understand. $13.70 is pocket change today. That barely covers the cost of Starbucks and a muffin. But it amounts to $5,000 a year when you spend it every day. People don't realize their daily Starbucks costs them $5,000 a year, just like they don't comprehend that their EITC payment or nursing care for a loved one is part of a vast federal spending that's protected by law, and it's become unaffordable as both cost and demand skyrocket. The dependency has become so normalized that people won't allow Washington to touch it. Any elected official that so much as hints that they want to balance the budget by cutting these programs commits political suicide. The same American public that screams for fiscal irresponsibility is the same American public that votes them out of office when they try to rein this in. And the American people do not realize it, but they're running out of time. The Fed's rate hikes under Biden pushed the interest America pays on the debt to record levels that could equal the amount of defense spending in 2025. It's a canary in the coal mine moment that indicates that the financial cliff is closer than we think. America cannot sustain balanced budgets for the future without cuts that are anathema to the American public. They blame profligate spending on $1,000 toilet seats, arcane studies on sexually confused salamanders, and pork barrel projects without understanding how their benefits contribute to the spending crisis in America. If the government continues to pay for interest and defense spending, and the Americans won't tolerate a reduction in their entitlements, they can expect deficits as the status quo for the foreseeable future. There isn't enough waste, fraud, and inflated military hardware to cut that can cover 2025's deficit, which is predicted to cost between $2 and $4 trillion. The question is, what happens first? Will Americans have their come-to-Jesus moment where they willfully give up EITC payments that are now a part of their household budgets, or welcome elderly parents into their homes for their end-of-life journey to balance the budget? Or do they keep the status quo until the unavoidable crash sinks America? There's little hope for the former. My money is on the latter. Brace for impact. That was from an article on the American Thinker that I had published on Christmas Day. I want to give you a little bit more breakdown on this to help you understand where we're at with the debt crisis in America and the fact that it isn't going to be solved, regardless of what any politician or what your candidate of choice happens to tell you. So here's the way this works. Let's cut to the chase. Every politician, every essentially president and Congress relies on deficit spending. They have to. Because of all these programs that were promised to the American people that the American people can't comprehend how to cut. So each election cycle, your candidate of choice, whether it's Democrat or Republican, and this is a bipartisan issue, will look at you and say, hey, I'm going to be the guy that solves this. The debt is out of hand. We're going to be the one that balances and takes care of this for the American people. And every administration runs deficits from Reagan on forward. The only time we've actually balanced the budget was under Bill Clinton for a couple of years, but then things reverted to the status quo. And the very reason is what was outlined in this article. And it's the entitlements that are driving everything. When you take a look at the three levels of entitlements, whether it was income security, veterans benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, that's $4.4 trillion out of our budget every year. It's almost 70% of federal spending. Where do you cut it? People think that we can tackle this problem, we can solve this if we simply cut federal waste and overspending. The reality is, if you pay for interest on the national debt, three levels of entitlement, and defense spending, you have $917 billion for the rest of the government. If you got rid of the waste, you would have what? If we took 25% of the budget out because of waste, it's a drop in the bucket. You could remove the rest of federal spending, everything the government does, and still not balance the budget in 2023. $917 billion of federal spending against $1.6 trillion in a deficit. It simply doesn't work. And that's why there is no solution for this problem moving forward. What's going to happen is the American public we're going to have to look in the mirror and we're going to have to ask ourselves, what federal programs are we going to be able to do without? And it's hard. I understand that. Do you cut disability payments for people with MS? Do you cut veterans benefits? Do you cut CHIP payments for single mothers who rely on this for health insurance for their kids? It's a difficult problem. But it began because we were promised so much, and none of us as American people really bothered to ask ourselves whether the government could actually pay for this. We just are happy to have the can kicked down the road as long as we get what we need and everything doesn't crash. But as the article tells you, the interest on the national debt could equal defense spending in 2025. And that marks a crisis point for the nation. We're pushing ourselves to insolvency, and that cannot be avoided no matter what we think. So the two-part problem that has two aspects to the solution, and it starts with the American people becoming educated about what's actually happening with the budget crisis, how it affects them, and what we're all going to have to do as the American people to solve this moving forward. We need to hold Washington accountable, but we need to understand where the accountability begins with us. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you being a part of the podcast. If you want to read this article or find out more of my articles and more information, you can find that at chuckmason.net.